Alrighty, hello everyone. As mentioned before, my name is Aaron Buffington, and kind of the goal for this presentation is to kind of show some alternatives for cost savings that you might run into as you're actually prescribing for your patients. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so quick disclosure. I have nothing to disclose. I don't work for any companies currently to where this might be a conflict of interest. On a side note, I will be mentioning a couple of companies specifically by name. It is by no means an endorsement. It is just, they're good programs. I like them. You should be aware of them as well. But I have no financial disclosures with any ties to any of these companies. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, if you actually look at it, the US spent about $348 billion on retail prescriptions alone in 2021. Fairly some large amount of money. And shockingly, drug prices don't seem to actually go down a whole lot. They tend to actually keep going up. Yearly deductibles for 2021 was $445. So what does that actually mean? That means your patient is responsible for paying $445 at the beginning of each month, at the beginning of each year for their Medicare Part D coverage. Now some patients can hit that very, very quickly. Some patients cannot, and it won't be till June and when they actually hit their deductible. It all depends on what medications they're getting. Initial coverage will only last the individual patients for about $4,000. After they spend $4,000, they hit what's called the donut hole, and the cost shifts back onto them to primarily as the primary payer. Now, after they hit the donut hole and they have spent $6,550 of their own money, they go back into what's called catastrophic coverage, and they hit the other end of the donut hole. So depending on your patient, what they're getting, I've seen some patients hit their donut hole in March. I've seen some people hit their donut holes in October, and some people magically never hit their donut hole. So it really does depend on the patient. Case in point, not every patient is going to have $400 at the beginning of each year to meet their insurance deductibles. A lot of patients definitely are going to be on medications that are going to exceed $4,000. So what do we do for these patients that are going to fall in these situations? So I want to play a little bit of a game. Another fun fact about me, I love to play golf. Few things that if you don't play a lot of golf, here's a few things that you need to know. A, surprisingly expensive hobby to have. The highest score does not win. And as much as you play, you never even get better. But one of my goals is when I retire, is to get a brand new set of clubs and play around at Pebble Beach. That's my bucket list. That's something I've always wanted to do. But diabetes runs in my family. I am an asthmatic. Chances are I will actually be on some of these medications at a certain point. So let's play a little bit of a game. What do you think is more expensive? A month's supply of Trulicity cash price or a brand new set of golf irons? If you think the irons are more expensive, raise your hand. One, okay. If you think the Trulicity is more expensive, raise your hand. Okay. So it actually looks like the irons win, but only about $7. Well, obviously that's very expensive. So maybe I will skip buying the new set of clubs because I do have some. Maybe I'll just go for the driver. The driver is the big one that makes you hit it the farthest. It's the one that people always want to have, the newest and latest and greatest. So what do you think is more expensive? The driver or a month's supply of Forxiga? If you think Forxiga is more expensive, raise your hand. If you think the driver is more expensive, raise your hand. Forxiga won this round. Okay, well, once again, keep in mind, that's just for 1 month. The driver might be forever, so very expensive hobby. Maybe I will just play at Pebble Beach. What do you think is more expensive? A month's supply worth of Trilogy, the inhaler, or one booking tea time at Pebble Beach? If you think Pebble Beach is more expensive, raise your hand. If you think Trilogy is more expensive, raise your hand. So, month supply of Trilogy is over $600. Now, personally, I think my wife would murder me if I spent $595 on 1 round of golf, but cross that bridge when we get there. So, why does this matter? Case in point, medications are expensive. And there's plenty of literature out there that shows the more patients have to pay, the higher their cost, the least compliant they tend to be, which is, as healthcare providers, we want our patients to take their medications so they can continue to be healthy. Very difficult to do when they have to make the real life decisions between drugs or rent, drugs or groceries. So what I'm going to show you is some alternatives that I wish I knew when I first started pharmacy about some of these programs, and B, I hope all of you know when we start doing some of these programs. First of all, sometimes cash is king. Now, depending on the situations, cash is actually cheaper to go through than actual insurance. Now note, I said even with insurance, co-pays have been increasing depending on plans, programs. Some individuals, even though they have Medicare and a supplemental insurance, I have seen patients with co-pays for pretty generic stuff exceed $35, $45, and $50, where the cash price of that medication is only $10. And there is no rhyme and reason behind why one copay at one location is this high, where if you go to another place, it's actually significantly cheaper. Now, thankfully, I will say in the world of pharmacy, the gag clause of what we refer to as letting people know about cash prices, that's actually been lifted, and we are allowed to discuss or have people ask about cash prices. We can now even recommend cash prices to individuals. Only a few years ago, that actually became a thing. Before that, it was actually illegal on our contracts with insurance providers to actually mention cash pricing as a potential savings. So that's also pretty exciting. So the three main programs I kind of want to talk about today is Walmart's $4 list, Amazon's prescription program, and your independent pharmacies. So in the world of cheap cash price medications, Walmart was the first, and it is still, in my opinion, one of the best. Now, Walmart, Sam's Club, Costco, all of them have very, very competitive cash prices. This is just their most current list that I was able to find. If you look at it, you can actually cover a lot of disease states with their $4 list. We have metformin on a $4 list, metformin ER on the $4 list. We have your ACEs, we have ARBs, we have carvedilol, full month supply for only $4. That will typically beat most Medicare copays, unless they have some very Cadillac supplemental insurance. Those prices are incredibly difficult to beat. And if you look at it, we've covered diabetes, we've covered cholesterol, and we covered blood pressure, and we haven't even gotten to the second page. So very good program. I do strongly encourage you to all take a look at these. And on a quick side note, you'll also notice metformin ER is on there. As a pharmacist, I just have to throw this out there. Do not write a prescription for metformin 1000 ER. It is not covered. The osmotic costs $1,000, where the 500 ER is on the $4 list. So no insurance will cover it. Do not write for the ER 1000, but that's just a personal side note. On their second list, once again, very good competitive savings. They have levothyroxine, pretty much every strength for a $4 on the $4 list. Now, I used to work for Walmart. I used to work for an independent. I can tell you right now, there's no way anyone can compete against levothyroxine on the $4 list. That is just an incredible savings. Even with my best discounting at an independent state, we would still be looking at a copay about $25. So significant savings in that standpoint. Behavioral health, they got Cymbalta on there. I believe that's actually $9 for their monthly subscription. They do have contraceptives on there. Very last one, if you may have a little trouble seeing down there, they have a rescue inhaler for a cash price of $24, which Ventolin rescue inhaler cash price at any of the other big chains or even at my independent was still going to run you close to 50 bucks. So once again, very good savings in regards to the $4 list. I encourage everyone to have a copy. And as I mentioned before, Sam's Club, Costco, they all have similar programs to it, something that I would explore. A very interesting one, and I do tip my hat to Walmart, is that they have actually a very competitive insulin program as well. You can get a vial of insulin, Novolin N, Novolin R, and 70/30 for $25 cash. Where if you're looking for a vial or a box of Levemir or Lantus, cash prices is going to exceed $300. So I know dosing can be a little more complicated. No one necessarily likes to have to do the syringe, but those savings are very significant. Recently, Walmart actually even came out with quick pen versions of their insulin programs. You can get a box of Novolin 70/30 in a pen form for $42. Once again, that just blew my mind. Cash price for that outside, you're still going to probably be looking at $183. Is roughly about the ballpark going through a Walgreens, CVS, or even my independent. That's a very good deal. Even more recently, they came out with a Novolog, a rapid-acting insulin, both in a vial and a pen form for under $100. $78 for a pen version of a rapid-acting insulin is insane. You are not going to find that really anywhere else. Now, I know that still sounds relatively expensive, especially depending on the patient's profile, but as more and more programs start coming out with these insulin saving programs, I expect those prices to start dropping. So definitely something to keep an eye out. I imagine Walmart will probably be the most competitive, and it'll probably be the quickest to respond in terms of price dropping, along with the second one I want to talk about, Amazon. So those of you who don't know, Amazon is getting into the drug business. They bought Rapid Pack, and they've continued to expand into the pharmacy world. This one is losartan, very common blood pressure medication. Can anyone point out the very interesting kind of niche on the Amazon one? I'll give you a hint. Look at the day supply. Amazon is offering 6-month supplies of medication, which, once again, if we're looking at a world of compliance, only having to go to a pharmacy or not even having to go, have them ship it to you twice a year gives you readily available access to your medication at a pretty affordable price. So the 6 months roughly is running about $7 a month. And they have this for a variety of medications. Amazon, it's very interesting because I personally don't like their display of their online pharmacy, But if your patient is actually very specific on the manufacturer of their medication, you can actually shop based on the manufacturer of it, and they will find it for you. Prices may vary a little bit, but it's pretty accurate to what the overall price is going to be. So if you have that patient that is insistent that they are allergic to yellow dye, even though that they have had yellow dye products for years and years and years, but they have it this one more time, they're going to die, you can find the alternative on Amazon. It's a little more pain to search, and I would recommend this maybe more for the more tech savvy patients, just given its search engine and criterias, but also very good program. There we go. Also have an insulin program. Now, look at the day supply for this one. This one is actually 3 boxes of a rapid acting insulin as well for $144. Those 3 boxes beat the cash price of 1 box pretty much anywhere else. An incredible savings. They can ship it directly to you. Unfortunately, they do not offer the 6 months supply worth of that one. But once again, their niche is sort of, we'll send it to you. We'll keep you on auto refill. Can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. Not going to talk about that part. But, yes, real quick.
Okay, so I've never sent a prescription to Amazon. How does it work to send prescriptions to Amazon? Is it the same as sending it to Walmart or anywhere else?
It's actually very similar to if you've ever had any interactions with mail order pharmacy. A lot of times the patient will request the prescription through Amazon, and Amazon will either directly reach out to the provider, or they will give the patient the information that they need to send it to Amazon. But it actually works very similar to all mail orders. A lot of times they will reach out to you and you can just give them the prescription right there. And once you're in that system, refills are pretty simple in that sense. And then one last good example, once again, albuterols. Used to be generic, used to be $10, not so much anymore. Cash price still very expensive. Amazon, you can get 3 inhalers for $21, which I can't compete against that on an independent level. So like I said, that is significant savings. Even through insurance, they're better off going through cash. Most copays for 1 inhaler will roughly run about $20. They can get 3 for the exact same price. And then the last kind of one I want people to also keep in mind is your local independent pharmacies. Now, independent pharmacies do have much more flexibility in terms of their costs. They aren't necessarily contracted by corporate to have that you need to sell this at this price. They do have a little more flexibility in terms of what they can and cannot do. Actually, a very popular trend amongst independents is something called cost plus 10. So if you think about it, they don't just buy 30 tablets worth of any drug at a time. They buy 1,000 count bottles of medication, to where the individual pill itself, it's only a couple of cents. So they take what the actual price of the pills are and add $10 to cover overhead, cost, vials, prescriptions, counseling, all of that. Roughly, break-even point is about $10. So you can get, in a lot of independent stores, you can get your lisinoprils, you can get your blood pressure medications, clopidogrel, all of those for roughly about $10 for a monthly supply, which we just talked about, hey, Walmart can do that for $4. Why would I consider doing that? And that's a fair point. But cost plus 10 also works on 90-day supplies. So if you looked back at that Walmart slide where it had, Wellbutrin was a good example. Their 90-day supply was, I believe, about $21. 90-day supply with a cost plus 10 is still typically going to run you about $12 to $13. That savings of those pills apply to 90-day supplies. Now, this became a big thing once kind of Mark Cuban saw, I don't know if you kept up in the world of pharmacy, but Mark Cuban recently started an online pharmacy, and their business model is cost plus 10. Whatever the tablets actually cost you, add $10 to it, and that's the pricing. It's nice because it's very predictable, it doesn't spike, and you actually know kind of what you're getting in terms of what you're actually paying for. It is what I consider to be a reasonable markup, where once again, you have those exact same medications, you're paying cash price at some other location, the markup is 12 times what the actual copay is. And it's all dependent on how other stores calculate what their copay markup is going to be. So that's a minefield in terms of how they actually do that. If you have any major questions on that, we can save that to the end, but it's actually a very, very fascinating topic. So what are some problems you might have doing these programs? Well, first of all, prescription drugs that you pay cash for do not apply to that deductible. That $445 that they need to meet for Medicare patients, if you're paying cash for it, it doesn't go towards that. So you will keep paying these cash prices and you will maybe potentially never actually hit your deductible to activate the reduced prices that you have through your Medicare. Now that is solely a patient-to-patient situation. A lot of patients that I have paying cash price is still significantly cheaper than what their annual deductible is. They will never hit their deductible. They're on very few maintenance medications, and what they are on are cheap generics. It makes sense for them just to pay the cash. But you get that patient that starts getting on a brand name insulin, a brand name inhaler, brand name anything really, they will have to eventually hit that deductible. And this can unfortunately just delay them from hitting that deductible. In the long run, for certain patients, it can actually cost them more money. This does tend to lead to something called polypharmacy, which patients have prescriptions at 3, 4, 5 different pharmacies. Now, that's a complicating factor because that will also decrease compliance because it's very difficult to keep track of where people are getting medications filled. You all have to send it to 3 or 4 different pharmacies, but at this pharmacy, they get a 90-day supply. This pharmacy, they get a 30-day supply. And fun fact, none of those pharmacy softwares interact with other pharmacy softwares. Us as the pharmacy have no idea outside our system what that patient is actually on. And it can change, there can be drug-drug interactions. It does lead to a potential safety issue. I do typically strongly encourage people to kind of pick a pharmacy and stay with it, even if it's not with me or in the past with Walmart or with our independents. For a safety issue, I do generally recommend pick one and stay with it, just because it simplifies that regimen. Now, if you'll also notice, all of those saving programs, not one of them mentioned a brand name drug. So, not particularly practical for brand name drug products. Don't get me wrong, you can still do a lot of good and cover almost every disease state with generics, but sometimes brands are slightly better or newer and do more things, and that is definitely something to keep in mind. Another topic that I really do want to talk about in terms of cost savings is, apologize for the lack of drama in that, saving cards. Now, I classify these into 2 categories. You have your coupon cards and then you have your discount cards. Now, coupon cards I'm going to refer to as your good RXs. I pick on them a lot because they were kind of the first, but there's multiple ones out there. I don't remember which the one that Martin Sheen's advertising for. They're all more or less have the exact same business model. They do and can lead to significant savings for patients, but there's a few things that I really wish I knew before I started pharmacy, and I was shocked when I actually learned some of these things. So, first fact, on the GoodRx discount cards, and when I say GoodRx, I'm referring to all of those kind of coupon cards, cannot be used with insurance. So even if they have a copay through their insurance and they hand us a GoodRx card thinking that that is going to change their copay, no, you cannot use both. It is a one or the other situation. That goes with Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance. You cannot submit through both. They are actually quite fast and convenient for patients. If they have a smartphone, they can actually pull up that discount card as they're standing in line for their prescription. Very easy, very accessible, but they can be very store specific. If you're super bored at a certain point, I encourage you to kind of play around GoodRx. You'll notice depending at which location for which medication, the cost savings incredibly different. I was looking at it the other day. One medication at Safeway was $7, where if you were to go to CVS, it was still going to be in the $35 range. And it just depends on the medications, on which one is going to be. But you cannot use that Safeway coupon at the CVS. It has to stay with the original location. They're not universally the same. And that all goes to contracting. Once again, another very fascinating conversation. And that brings me to the other point. Savings can actually be very dramatic depending on what it is. Still gonna kind of run into the issues with brands. GoodRx for brand name products maybe tackle $25, $45. But if you're talking about medications that cost $650, they're still gonna have to pay that $600. So still more practical for generics. But once again, with some of those cash programs, like a GoodRx would not really save you any more money in comparison to like an alternative on the Walmart $4 list or a potential cash price elsewhere. That is solely up to what the actual product is. The other one that I do want to talk about is actual manufacturer specific discount cards. Now, I love manufacturer discount cards. From a pharmacy perspective, I love them, I accept them because they actually pay me. GoodRx's and all those other coupon type cards actually don't reimburse the actual cost of the medication. In that case, the pharmacy actually takes a hit on every single one of those GoodRx cards. Now, when I was working at Walmart, I didn't care. It wasn't my money. I was perfectly fine to let corporate take the hit on that. When I became an independent and it did become my money, that definitely became an issue very, very quickly. So just please keep in mind, you are asking the pharmacy to take a hit on those coupon cards. Manufacturing saving cards actually do pay back the pharmacy in a form of a rebate. So they don't actually take a hit in regards to that. They can be used with private insurance. Now, those are the cards that if they have private insurance and they show you, and they still have like a pretty high discount, pretty high copay, that is when those manufacturer cards come into play. I've seen those take $100 copays down to 10 bucks. Those are very good for brand name products. Unfortunately, they are very kind of tied to private insurance, which New Mexico is a little bit harder. We're not exactly a very wealthy state, and we don't have a very large private insurance population, at least especially where I'm from. We have a lot of Medicaid, which unfortunately the manufacturer cards still do not apply with Medicaid. They do require activation on the patient's part. They do have to take the card, go to the website, fill out a form, sign up for it before they are actually activated. Please don't give them discount cards and tell them go directly to the pharmacy. It sometimes can take up to 24 hours for their registration to actually go through. So please keep that in mind. They are accepted at every pharmacy. So Walmart's, Independents, CVS's, Walgreens, they will all accept manufacturer discount cards. Once again, because they get that guaranteed reimbursement back. So you don't have, they're not store specific. They can actually take that discount, their manufacturer card, fill it at Walgreens one time, fill it at CVS the next day, not an issue. They can still save patients money even if they don't have insurance. Now, once again, savings may not be particularly high on brand name products, but they can somewhere typically take off $50 to $150 on a cash price. It's not always great depending on the cost of the medication, but it's still better than nothing. And I do want, and this could be an interesting topic, I'm sure there might be a question on it, a quick warning. And this is directly from Consumer Report, and it's kind of something I wish everyone knows about. GoodRx can save patients money on their meds. It will also share their information with Facebook, Google, and other locations. How they make their money is the information that they have to use to bill through their program. They'll give us a bin, they'll give us billing information that we have to send through our program. In their terms of service, you actually forfeit some of your information rights to them, at which they are actually allowed to sell that information to other companies. Now, depending on the patient, depending on the savings, some of them don't care. Some of them, that is absolutely a deal breaker for a lot of people. And I know some people are going to ask, well, isn't that a violation of their HIPAA? No, it is not. You've actually, when you signed up and agreed to use it, you forfeited that portion to it. So please keep that in mind. Manufacturer cards don't do that. So I tend to favor one over the other, but full disclosure, I am a little more biased to the manufacturer ones. Anyone have any questions on that? Okay, so go through another quick topic. This is kind of what I call the lightning round. Gonna get into a little more weeds here on some of the topics here. So, drug samples. Now, I'm sure as providers, you have all came in contact with a drug rep that have given you samples to hand out to your patients. I have a complicated feeling towards drug samples. And there's, from a pharmacy perspective, there's kind of two schools, and both have a shade of truth. The only one school of thought is that their drug samples, basically meaning they're very expensive, they're most likely not going to be covered by insurance without a prior authorization. Samples free, the second price is that the second time is where they get you. And that's a shade of truth in there too. However, they are new products. They do tend to offer a superiority to what is available on the market, and it does give access to very low income individuals to try to medications that otherwise have failed other treatments. So there's a shade of truth to both of those. What I would also warn about drug samples that hits a little more complicated is, once again, that issue we ran into with the polypharmacy. The pharmacy does not know if your patient is on drug samples. It is not documented anywhere. We do not see it in our computer programs. I've had some very, oh my gosh moments when it came to actually drug sampling. Just last month when I was still with CARE, I did have a patient receiving samples of Entresto. They received it from their cardiologist. Their primary care was still providing them prescriptions for lisinopril, which basically those are 2 double dosings of ACEs on there. And they have been double dosing on their ACEs for a very long time. The only reason it got caught is because they brought in the sample bottle of Entresto and tried to get a refill for it. And we couldn't find this anywhere. We had no idea where it was. Finally contacted their general care provider, and they're sitting there going like, we didn't prescribe them Entresto. We have no idea what you're talking about. It is not on their medication list. So we actually had to call the patient back and find out where they got it, and they got it from their cardiologist. Pharmacy, primary care, none of them had any idea that they were receiving samples from another provider. So inhalers are also a very dangerous place with that one. A lot of, I did have a couple of patients receiving samples of Advair, but they were also getting a prescription that was covered on their insurance for Symbicort. Exact same time. Once again, only reason it was caught because they tried to call in the refill for the Advair. There's no communication with the drug sampling. So that kind of leaves me with drug sampling in a very complex area in the sense that I understand why they do it, and it is great access to potentially better medications that may work better for patients. But at a certain point, samples do run out, prior authorizations are still going to have to go through, and prior authorizations still may get denied depending on the insurance. So drug sampling can kind of just be a Band-Aid. It can be a great source of new medication. Once again, very patient dependent on that. And then another kind of complicated topic that I like to discuss is the January reset and formulary changes. Now, as we talked, to go full circle, like the second slide we talked about was deductibles having to be met. That resets every January for Medicare patients. So even if they hit their deductible in March, even if they just now hit their deductible in November, January comes around, that deductible resets and you're right back at the $445 that you have to pay first. It is always a shock to patients in January why their medications cost so much more. And they will always say that they don't have a deductible. Complicated because there's multiple versions of Medicare, and a lot of people say that they have a supplemental through AARP. Most supplemental plans only apply to their Medicare Part A and B. It's a separate supplemental to get Medicare Part D to cover those copays. So when January comes around and you have patients on $600, $700 medications, there's going to be a sticker shock. I encourage people just to be aware of that. Let them know that this may cost them quite a bit of money, that first purchase, depending on what it is. And I have problems with formulary changes and people signing up for in terms of Medicare, which, don't get me wrong, always sign up for your Medicare D when it is available. If you delay it, you have to pay the penalty each year after that. Do not delay it, even if you are on relatively cheap medications and you say, I will wait until I'm on the expensive stuff. Well, for every year you delay, they add on a 1% charge that you will pay the rest of your life. So even if you're on cheap stuff, sign up for it on time. But that's besides the point. A lot of people make their Medicare Part D decisions roughly in October. And once they make that decision and they sign up for that plan, they are locked into it for a full year. And it always bothers me that they will see what their medication is. They'll go to their pharmacy and they'll say, this is what we're looking at. This is kind of what your copays are going to be. This is what's covered. And they make their plans based on that. Well, starting in March, the insurance companies' plans are actually allowed to change what is on their formulary or change the tier. So if you think about it, they just locked into something for an entire year and they're allowed to change it, but the patient isn't. So be aware of that. Tier medications are starting to become more popular to where they'll say that it is covered, but the amount that they will pay back or force onto the patient can change dramatically. They can do it on a month-to-month basis if they really choose, and they do not have to notify the patient, the provider, or the pharmacy on it. So once again, if that does happen, there are very effective alternatives to that. going back to the cash prices. And kind of to go more into the weeds in regards to the deductibles, and as prices are going up higher and higher, my opinion on it is there is incentives to get patients to catastrophic coverage as quickly as possible. So if you have patients go on very expensive medications and they have to get rushed to the donut hole, well, that also means that they're going to get to the other end of the donut hole much quicker. What people don't always realize is that catastrophic coverage on the other end of the donut hole is actually subsidized. They make more money once they actually get to critical care coverage. So that has kind of led to this very interesting cat and mouse game as to they are more benefited to have the medications cost more because it pushes them to catastrophic coverage quicker. And that is also why United's Health, our drug prices continue to climb at very dramatic rates. Now, that's mostly my opinion as to why they do that. There is some data suggest that that is indeed what's happening. It depends on who you ask. They'll also have other sides, and I do understand that it takes about roughly $1 billion to get a drug to market, and by the time your patent wears off, you have roughly 4 to 5 years to make all your money back, plus the ones that did not make it to market. Very complicated situation. The only problem is that the patient's the one that kind of gets screwed in this process. So that's kind of more my thoughts on it, but there's a lot of reasons as to why the prices continue to keep going higher and higher. And I would encourage people to realize that it is more beneficial to get people to catastrophic coverage quicker. And that's kind of where I'm going to go on that part. I do have some time left if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask in regards to cost savings. Ooh, I got one.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
So if you send a prescription and they do have insurance, are they still able to pay cash, or once it goes through, are they just have to pay with the insurance copay?
That's a handsome question. So the question was, if you send a prescription through and it goes through their insurance, are they allowed to basically change their mind and go through cash? Yes, they are 100% able to say, hey, I don't want to pay this, what's your cash price? Even if it was already ran and ready for pickup, the patient has the right to ask what the cash price is and pay the cash price. Now, that'll get complicated with mail order, just given the sense that it's very difficult to actually talk to a person on mail order to say, hey, I want to do this through cash. A lot of mail orders don't always do cash pricing, mostly because they're actually owned by insurance companies, and it is actually much cheaper for the insurance company to do their own mail order. And if they're not doing the insurance part, they don't always do cash pricing for mail order. But in terms of Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, all of them, perfectly fine to request it to shift to cash. No penalty on the patient.
So if you send your prescriptions to Walmart and it's on the formulary, it's going to automatically go to the $4 formulary, or is it going to go through their insurance?
Very good question. Question was if they, and I'm saying that for the camera. So the question was, if they send it to Walmart, will it automatically go through the $4 list, or will it go through the insurance? If it is established patient with insurance on file, it'll automatically go through the insurance. However, they can, once again, can still request it to be cash. The computer systems for most pharmacies are actually set up to do exactly what you did last time. So once they convert it to cash, it'll most likely stay cash the rest of that prescription. Now, The hiccup to that, and I've been chewed out by many, many, many patients over this, is when that prescription expires and they send you over a new prescription. That is a new prescription number. The system will consider it a brand new patient, and it'll go right back to the insurance that they have on file. So when they come in and yell, hey, this is not what I'm supposed to be paying, I'm supposed to be paying cash for this, it's like, oh, it was a brand new prescription. The system didn't catch that. But once again, can 100% ask go back to cash, and it'll stay that way for the length of that prescription. We'll run into that issue when they send in a new one.
Okay, so my question is, I'm very intrigued by the Amazon pharmacies, not only personally, but as a provider. Trying to get a pharmacist on the phone is almost as painful as vaginal steaming, sounds like. So what does the Amazon pharmacy look like? How do you talk to a person? Because I can't even make my Amazon returns correctly. And I just want to know what that looks like. It sounds like a great idea in theory, and I love to save money, but is it practical, and is it practical for providers?
Also a hands-up question. So that in a broad term can happen with regardless if it's Amazon, Walgreens, all those other places. I remember being on hold with a 3-letter abbreviated pharmacy for roughly about an hour and a half trying to get a transfer. I feel for that person because they were getting the absolute snot kicked out of them. So it's difficult sometimes to do that. Now, what I would say in regards to Amazon, you'll most likely have a very similar experience to contacting a mail order pharmacy. Now, that can be, I think they are slightly better than your typical mail order, but it can actually be very difficult to get a hold of an individual, especially if you sent it in and you want to make a change to it or you want to DC it. Those can also be very difficult things to do in regards to that. Especially in terms of mail order, if you want to actually change or send in a new prescription for that patient and change the dose, but you don't discontinue the previous dose, that person is going to get both of them show up on their doorstep. And they may do that for 6 months until they actually run out of the refill, even though you sent notifications saying, hey, stop, they're not on this anymore. Sometimes they'll just keep sending it until the prescription actually runs out. So I do think that they are a little bit better than your standard mail order, but you may still run into that communication issues with them. They are new, they're getting better at it, but buyers beware, so to speak. So she asked can patients stop, say, the Amazon or the mail order, correct?
Right. So can the patient go on and stop at, like chewy.com for your pets?
You would think so. So yes, they can actually go in and request not to receive the medication, but I can speak of personal experience. Even if they go on and request it, there is still a chance, more than a 50% chance, that medication that will not go through the first time. And depending on the bulk amount that they send them, if it's a 90-day supply, they may still get another shipment of a 90-day supply before they acknowledge the stop on the medication. And they do not take the medicine back. No. Once you buy so it's very similar to a brown bag situation, brown bag versus white bags. On a mail order, same thing, you'd run into the same issue with Walgreens and say, hey, this went through, I already picked it up, but I don't need it, it got discontinued. At the store, you might be okay if you haven't left yet, but the second you step foot on concrete, they cannot take it back. No mail order will take any of the medication back, even if it was by mistake, by error, wrong patient. That has happened before. They will not take that medicine back. Oop.
This is a personal question for me. I deal with Express Scripts for Vyvanse, for ADD meds scheduled, and it's a nightmare because you never know when the prescription is going to arrive to your home, and you have to sign for it. So I end up having it sent to a retail pharmacy, and of course, paying a lot more. Do you have any idea how Amazon does their deliveries? Like, is it going out with the Amazon truck you see in the neighborhood each day, and they come to your door and sign for it more quickly?
So it does actually work very similar to the current Amazon system. Now, sometimes they will require that signature, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it depends on the Amazon driver, to be honest with you. Now, I would say in regards to the predictability of when your medication is actually going to get there, it is much better than your traditional mail order in regards to that. They typically are very good at communicating, hey, it was sent there, hey, it's on its way, hey, it should be there that day. They stay in much better communication than your typical mail order pharmacy, where it's basically check your mailbox for the next 7 days and hope it's not insulin. That does also happen quite a bit too. I would have much more personal faith. I would have more faith in Amazon shipping me insulin than some of the mail orders, just given you always wonder how long that product's going to be sitting outside before they actually take it. And because Amazon has much better communication with their patients when it's going to be delivered, I feel that it's still going to be much better, have a better chance of being inside the range in which it's supposed to be stored at. So that would be my advice on that part. So they asked if Amazon ships controlled substances and will it show up on a PMP. So all controlled substances do have to go through a PMP process. That can depend dramatically on state regulations brought by the Board of Pharmacy of that state. So yes, they do controlled substances, and yes, it is supposed to go through the PMP. There are loopholes depending on what states those are actually going to. So also something to be aware of. It can get complicated fast in regards to that, but they would follow the exact same rules as a standard mail order. They have to have it go through the PMP. Now, not all PMPs communicate with one another. Not all the states share that information. Sometimes you have to request that information on the individual state because they don't have they're not set up to actually share what controlled substances were bought. Thankfully, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Texas, all of them, you can run a PMP and it will all go through there. Sometimes Utah can be a little complicated. Oh, I have another one.
My experience with doing like mail order and controlled substance, I don't like to do it because it's really easy for the patient to say they've never actually got it.
Correct.
If they're on a controlled substance, it has to go through a local pharmacy. That's just, I mean, I feel like as a provider, if I'm going to write it out, because I had a problem one time with a patient saying he never got it.
Correct. And to be fair, that is a possibility that depending on the mail and depending on the timing, if they're on a very tight paying contract, and they have up to 7 days to actually give it to you, that you do potentially run into scenarios in which they're going to go 3, 4, 5 days without their pain medication. That does happen. Now, I, much like you, prefer to have it at a physical location because you can call that location, you can talk to a person and they can verify, yes, this was sent on this day, yes, they signed it, yes, they picked it up. All of that, very much better traceable, guaranteed to go through the PMP that they did get that. Harder to do with the mail orders, and I do typically encourage to maybe not do pain particular medications through mail orders. Now, what I will also say on a quick side note, I'm glad you brought up pain. A very common thing that we are seeing is most insurances, in order to combat opioid dependence, have come up with kind of a universal strategy that for the first fill, they will only pay for a 7 days worth of any pain medication. Now, this applies to people who have been on their pain medication for years. And this can actually happen quarterly, biannually, annually, depends. So if you write a prescription for a patient for, say, 60 hydrocodones, they take it twice a day. If it's that first fill, potentially in the first of the year, insurance will only pay for 7 days worth. They cannot split it. It's either they have to pay cash for it or they forfeit the other remaining portions of their prescription. Something that you may or may not be aware of that can happen. Sometimes they actually make the first 4 prescriptions be 7 days worth. And then after they hit their 7 days worth, they'll start paying for the full month at the same time. We're getting into some really weird situations when it comes to actually refilling controlled pain medications. If a patient contacts you and says, hey, the insurance is not paying for my pain medication, personally, I think it's a 7-day situation in which they will only pay for the 7 days worth. After the insurance gets the 7 days worth, they'll pay for the full quantity again, but they will not pay for it until they see a claim for 7 days. So much like the issue we run into with paying cash, if they're always going to pay cash for the pain medications, it'll never go through for the 7-day supply because they won't forfeit the full quantity. It saves the insurance a lot of money, but because they never actually have to pay for it, but it costs the patient a lot more money in the long run. So if that does happen, be aware. The easiest way around that, ironically, is to write 2 prescriptions, one for 7 days worth and the other one for the remaining 30. Then on the refill, they should cover the full quantity of the 30-day supply. Oh, one more. So yes, that is also, so the question was that there was a rejection based on the opioid naive patient on a morphine milliequivalent of greater than 50 for their first documented dose. Complicated. Not all, if they switched insurance plans, this patient could have been on this medication for a very long time. That insurance company never saw it. So they want you to do a prior authorization. Ultimately, once again, this is a more cynical thought on it. If they deny that fill for at least 3 days, but they do that to everyone nationwide, they saved a significant amount of money. It's just kind of a game that they do play to make you, once again, cynical, to delay the pay that they have to do. Once that actually does go through, they should cover it again. But they are pushing more and more prior authorizations, especially in pain medications, to providers. And they are rejecting and forcing that on the most random stuff nowadays. But that does actually look like all my time. I will be around for a little bit longer. If you have any burning questions, just tackle me outside. But thank you.